Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. One of the teachings that has changed my life more than any other is the first hermetic principle, which states that the universe is mental. Now, for me, I translate this into the notion that nothing in our lives is objective in nature. And in actuality, everything is subjective based on the story/narrative we give it. As such, one could then theorize that our fulfillment, joy, and ultimate success in life can be characterized by what type of storyteller we are and the degree to which the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and life as a whole are empowering and uplifting rather than disempowering and draining. Today's guest on the show is a returning guest, dear friend of mine, and is someone who has assisted me in creating the most powerful and potent stories from which I can express myself through and share myself with the world as a result of. And in this episode, we dive deep into what's been transpiring in his life, the power of these stories, and much, much more. So please, help me in welcoming back my man Kyle Gray to the show. Kyle Gray, my man, I am so excited to have you back on the show. It's been too long, brother. How you been?
Ryan, I am stoked to be here. I love experiencing your questions, your mindset, and just having fun with you. And as we both know, podcasting is one of the best ways to create and collaborate together. Thanks so much for having me back. And I'm stoked to share some stories with you today.
Heck yes. Yeah, guys. Like I said in the intro, Kyle Gray, along with having many psychedelic experiences with myself and just having so many amazing, amazing times together, is also someone who has helped me tremendously when it comes to being able to share my story and just the stories of my life in more profound ways, more efficient ways, more effective ways. You know, I've gone through his programs quite a few times. I've worked with him privately, and he's been invaluable to me, you know, in creating webinars and being able to really like connect with my own story. And I think that for all of you listening, everything in your life is a story, right? Like every single aspect of your life. You know, the first hermetic principle is the universe is mental, which basically means everything's a story, you know? And before we dive into a little bit of the work we've done together and a little bit of catching up and things like that, I just want to ask you, man, what's been new in your world? What's been going on? How's life been? Give us a quick update, Kyle Gray.
Yeah, I think since listening, and this is, you know about a bit about this, but anybody who is just catching up, about 8 months ago, I moved from the big island of Hawaii, where I was living for about 2.5 years and was one of the greatest opt-outs of the pandemic that I could have asked for. And I've moved to Bend, Oregon, into a great community of friends, many mutual friends of ours that, I've been excited to be back into mountains and snow. For anybody who doesn't know what Bend, Oregon is like, it's very different than the green Oregon you're probably picturing in your head. But I've been going through a big transition, changing up a lot of different things about my business, from how I do my own podcast and how I showcase my skills and my talents, as well as my guests, in really fun and unique ways that I think are coming into some cool alignment. And been continuing on different psychedelic adventures, and there's been lots of lessons profound from that, and not always the ones that we want, and not necessarily what we hope for. Or a lot of times, I'll be honest, when I do have a psychedelic experience or I do something with intention, I definitely want to get the download or the shift or the miraculous insight that finally fixes all my problems and allows me to get to the next level. And haven't quite had that experience yet, despite a lot of people who facilitate these things promising it, which I think's, it's the adventure continues, my friend.
Yeah, dude, 100%, man. And, you know, it's funny you mentioned that too, because I think that I know I can definitely feel for that. I imagine many listeners can too. like the share circle envy at the end, where like you come out of it and you're like, oh, I had a pretty positive experience. And someone's like, I was with my grandmother and we were touching the astral realm and I could see the face of God, but it had like, 5 different faces. And I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, how did they experience that? And Brent Pella, do you know him? Brent Pella, the comedian?
No.
He's a hysterical dude. He does a lot of stuff with JP Sears and whatnot, but he had one about an intention circle, right? An intention envy of like the first person that goes is like, yeah, I just want to like, hold space. And the next person's like, I want to hold space and really give way to the ability to feel grateful in every moment of my life. And like, he's like, well, actually, I forgot part of my intention, Like,
oh, I actually have so seen funny. this
yeah.
this short, this like an Instagram reel. And he was like, I want to be present. And everybody's like disappointed and not enough galactivated language and there's attention. Totally. And I certainly, I have had the experiences. I can think of like a 5-MeO DMT experience where, I came in direct contact with God, the most intense in the best way, feeling so seen, so open, so vulnerable, so accepted. And still, after these experiences that people seek and want, coming back to the real world, and I feel I've done some work to integrate these things, but it's still hard to hold on to that feeling and hold on to those highs, just living our life. And I'm sure it's not all meant to be that. And I'm sure there's some lazy part of me that just wants my problems to be solved. It's kind of like when you go through college or you get through high school and then you get through college, and then like a lot of people were like, well, I'm done reading books, or I'm done, like things are going to be cruising now. I worked hard through college. So now the rest of my life's going to be a cruise. And it's just not so. But I think that we have that expectation in a lot of different ways. And I don't know, maybe this is something, I would say that this is maybe more of a man thing, or it's like some deep, maybe misguided desire of like, yeah, everything's going to be fixed and well, it'll be smooth sailing from here on out.
Yeah, man. Dude, it's so funny. That is totally like, as I understand it, like a very masculine thing. Like, cause I do the same thing where I'm like, I think of it like, oh, my window shade is loose. So if I put a nail in there and fix that, it's now fixed, right? Like it's that simple. It's like so frustrating when you get into experiences with anything, right? Like coaching, actually anything really in real life that's not putting together a window or something, anything with yourself where your mind's like, I'm aware of the problem. I want to fix it right now. And your body and everything else takes a long time to catch up. And so I too find myself, challenged with that at times. And the analogy that comes to me is it's almost like the gym, right? Where like, you could say like, if you're, let's say, unhealthy, you go to the gym to get healthy. There's a point where you're now healthy, but if you stop going to the gym, you'll revert back to being unhealthy. And so you still have to keep going to the gym to stay healthy. That's almost how I look at integration these days, is instead of telling myself like, all right, like I'm going to integrate and then I'm going to be done. It's more like I'm going to integrate, but I have to continue to like not integrate in the way of like doing all the time, but like, continuing to do the meditation, even on the day where I wake up on a Sunday and it's nice out and Rachel's like, let's go to the beach. And I'm like, I haven't meditated yet. I got to keep doing it on those days, because I know if I start giving into that, the wheels start falling off. And that's helped me a lot. Just like looking at it, it's like, I don't know when this is going to integrate, if that's even a thing, right? But I know that I can practice what I can do to be with myself, by myself each day, give myself love in whatever way I can, and be humbled by the universe, whatever happens. So I totally feel you on that. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that.
Building on that metaphor in a slightly different way, I feel like there's like identity lag. And if we imagine the same person, you're overweight, and then you go to the gym and you have your Rocky montage and you lose a bunch of pounds, and your pants, you can do the pants stretch thing of like, look at how much weight I lost. A lot of times it takes longer for your identity to catch up and for you to actually feel that, like, and you'll still be in the same behaviors as if you were an overweight person. And yeah, it's like going back to the gym or keeping up with it mentally, but we don't always realize how far we are or appreciate that. And it can be to our detriment sometimes.
Yeah, 100%, man. And that's why I'm so grateful to our mutual friend, Mark England, for dropping the, hey, you got to celebrate your wins every 2 seconds when we went through his programs, because now I don't know if I have, eyes to see where I once didn't or whatever, but I'm now aware of how important that is. Like Rach and I will constantly at the end of the night just reflect things to each other. And, and I found it so important because it is true, right? Our mind will almost integrate immediately. So like, let's say like we want this new car and we really dream of this car and whatever. We can get the car and by week 2, our mind's already used to it. It's like, whatever, and we forget how much it took to be able to get that car, whether it was the job promotion we worked really hard for or a certain KPI in business we had to hit, but we forget about it. It's like, that was last week. What did I do today? Right. And I think that like, that is such a curse. It can be such a curse, right? Because for me personally, if I let myself speed up too much, that's when that really starts happening. Like if I stop meditating as much, like, and I've done this so many times, man, like actually the first time we met, that was like the final straw for me. I had been like meditating, but kind of taking like weeks off at a time, telling myself I didn't have time for it, prioritizing exercise over meditation, all those different things to get away from being by myself with myself in silence. And that psilocybin journey we did was the first time that I really like just became accepting of the fact that like, dude, you just gotta stop doing that. Like you get to, but you also like at this point, you just really have to, you have to stop doing that. And that's personally helped me a lot. I don't know if it's the same with everyone, but that seemed to help me a lot. But it's, dude, like, especially like we were talking before we hit record, these last 6 to 8 months, man, woo, dude, a lot of shadow coming up. Everything that I had been doing for years, exercise, all these things started feeling weird. I had to change a lot of them up, go through a lot of like mini deaths, rebirths. You want to talk identity shift, like a lot of that, and I'm curious, have you been going through stuff like that too over the last like 6 to 8 months?
Yeah. In both internal and external, I think the move took a tremendous amount of energy, and it's a win that I can celebrate in my own way and probably haven't as much. And yeah, in my business, I've been noticing a lot of shifts where it was once easier to close clients and get people on board. I found that the same techniques that worked for me aren't working as well anymore. And I've tried a lot of things, and everybody that I talk to has a different solution. And of course, they give it to you after 3 seconds of listening to you, whether it's raise your prices, lower your prices. Oh, just do this. Oh, all you need is a form. Just ask a few more questions in your form before this, or try this, or listen to this one podcast, and it'll all be figured out. And it's made it really difficult for me to believe anybody or like accept these things. And I've also noticed, a change and a shift in how I spend my money, because it hasn't been coming in as easily. And I think for a long time, one of the things I would do is I would spend maybe in a similar way to how I would hope somebody would spend with me, for better and worse. But I've invested in a lot of coaching. I've invested in a lot of high-end events and experiences. And it's become almost like a slot machine kind of thing, where you're putting the coin in and you're hoping the big payoff's going to come. And it's caused me to reflect and have a desire where, I could spend that same amount of money and bring in a team member or build out systems and do things differently, rather than, I think that investing in yourself is the best investment that you could ever hope for. And I believe a lot of these things are absolutely worth the price tag, but always just going back and forth to these things. And so, yeah, there has been shifts, and I've even wanted to partner with other companies that really know and appreciate my skill set. And there's been some exciting opportunities that came right up to the edge of like me jumping in. And then all of a sudden they would be like, oh, well, our company's gone through a major pivot and we can't hire you anymore. Not just once, but like 3 times in the last year. And it's somewhat relieving and challenging, nevertheless, to know, okay, this isn't just me. This isn't my thing going on. A lot of people are going through these really big pivots right now and trying to find their way through it all. But yeah, it's been a different kind of like, if you want to be a patient person, or if you ask to be a patient person, you ask God, then he's going to test your patience. If you want to be a faithful person, then your faith's going to get tested. What you ask for, a lot of times you get the opposite of what you're hoping for in order to work that muscle. And I've been finding myself, just like what you've been saying, going back to the really simple things and doing meditations every morning and in the evening, and going to the gym and exercising even when I don't feel like it or don't want to, as an act of faith for myself, to carry myself through these uncertain times.
100%, man. Dude, it's so funny too, because I love these conversations because I feel as though in the online space, there's not enough people speaking about it. And as an entrepreneur, as you're an entrepreneur, and I imagine many listeners are either entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, these are things that will happen, right? Like I've been going through something very similar to you, dude. Like there's no way to quantify it. I can't look at one day in time and be like, that's when things changed. But I noticed around July, things just started shifting in big ways. And there was no control over it. There was no trying to stop it. It was just like, all right, hold on and just see what happens. And it almost went until about the new year, the Gregorian New Year anyway, where it was like, really getting challenging. It's almost like, if you're training for, I'm going to use a gym analogy again because it's easy, but if you're training for a bodybuilding competition, you might start training 6 months out. But it gets more and more challenging as you get closer to the event, because that's when you got to make sure you don't have enough water weight on you. So you got to start dehydrating yourself and all these things, right? So it was almost very similar. Like July was like the start of this metaphorical bodybuilding, prep. And then the end of December was like, it's showtime, and ever since then, the last couple of months have been like, okay, I'm now out of the peak, right? Like if we were going to use a mushroom analogy here, like I'm out of the peak, but I'm now starting to come into that awareness of okay, all of these things popping up for me, all of these people I've been listening to, again, like many of the same people, we have a lot of the same mentors and people we look up to and people we work with. And again, people that have great advice, right? Like they have great advice that's worked for them. But what I've been realizing is more and more how it's just, I've known what the answer was inside of me, not in terms of strategy and things like that, but in terms of hey, I want my life to look very different than I think many of the people who are giving me certain wisdom want their life to look. For all I know, a lot of people like being on calls all day, every day. That's not me, and it actually, the final straw for me was the other week, I went out with Rachel's family for a dinner, and I was talking to her dad. And her dad is someone who's a unit. Anyone who's listening, go look up Ernie, 0DTE on YouTube. He's a unit. He built automating trading systems for Wall Street. Super ridiculous, genius, smart kind of guy. He started working with this marketing company who brought him from 10 to 180K a month in 6 months. And they're like, dude, you're going to be at $1 million a month by the end of the year. And so I saw him just be like, hey, I was at 10K months, doing good, feasible, whatever. I link up with this company who is only giving him 25% of everything he's making, but they do everything. All he has to do is just show up and be on screen, and they have ramped him to a level. So I'm starting to realize delegation and these kind of things that we've heard before. I feel now, at least for me, I've been being tested because it's dude, what your soul really wants is a lifestyle that has more space in it, a lifestyle that isn't so strict with time. I had that the last few years, I think everyone goes through what you can call an eat shit phase or whatever it is, right? Where you're building something, you don't know what it is. You got to put in your stripes or earn your stripes. But I started realizing now I'm just at a point where I think that I'm trying to do what I feel I should do. And it's just my soul is showing me that's not really what it is. And when you were mentioning applying for jobs and teaming up with people, right? It's the same kind of thing where it's logically, that's a great idea. It's awesome. I like this person's mission. We would vibe really well together. But just something deeper in terms of wisdom within us is saying not this yet, and it's that test, because as we get closer to the point of well, we really want to go do something new, it gets harder and harder to be that peaceful, patient person. And it's almost you have to do more meditation and more of the opposite of what you think you need to do in order to get the desired results. So yeah, it's been a mind fuck, bro. Talk about a psychedelic experience.
For sure. I feel the same way. I want a life where I can have the space to be creative, and yeah, I would love to be at the place where I can just show up on screen and talk about the mystery and the things that I appreciate, or make music. One of the things that I did do over the last few months leading up to the new year was I started writing music again. I really enjoyed digging into Ableton, which is a music software. And I used to write a bunch of songs on my acoustic guitar, and I started there and wrote some songs out, and then plugged them into Ableton and plugged in some bass lines and some drums and things that I could perform this live set. And I did this live set that I called 23 and Me, which was 4 songs. And they were honestly very like frustrated and challenging songs about this last year. But it was a beautiful thing. And I believe and I feel that I want and deserve a life of a lot of freedom and spaciousness to create. And yeah, I've been in, I average, especially Tuesday through Thursday, 4 to 5 hours of Zoom calls or podcast interviews or coaching calls in a day. And, when things are working, I do love the process. I love what I'm doing. I love who I connect with. I love the guests on my show. I love the people that work with me and delivering the perspective shifts and challenging them in great ways. And yeah, I feel called in a similar way where I want to have this more freedom and spaciousness. And just like what we were saying about doing the meditations in a lot of ways, it's one of the first things to go, especially when I don't feel good. It's harder for me to create the videos or write the posts or give myself the same attention and care that I give the people I work with.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show. Yeah, dude, 100%, man. And it's such a funny conundrum, because I literally work the same way. Like the second I start feeling some sort of dis-ease or, lack of harmony within me, it's like, my mind just tells me like, go distract yourself, basically, right? Like go, grab an Olipop, go for a walk, go do all these things, right? Instead of like, nah, just sit in it, right? Like it's so funny because it's almost like that thing that at least for me, I figured out so many times, I've gotten the answer for so many times, like, oh, I sat in it and I came out of it. And at some point I was expecting that like the going thought in my head would be like when things went awry, it'd be like, you better sit in it. It works, right? But so far it's never what comes up. I have to like really just like force myself to sit in it. And Rachel's a big help too, because being an Aries, like sitting still is not really in my repertoire, where she's a Taurus. So being around her energy can really help a lot, just like, okay, I'll chill. But yeah, like doing the extra meditation every day, increasing the meditation times, like, and reminding myself of why I do what I do, like what I want my life to look like and things like that. And I got to thank you, bro, because you've been a huge part of how I've been able to tell my stories in a way that allow me to start really figuring out what I want my life to look like. And also, like we were talking about before with the wins thing, like, look back at the wins, man. Like I remember when we were doing this last round that I did with you privately to build out my new webinar. There was, I think it was Act 4, right? Where it was like kind of like the result, right? The results. And for anyone listening, Kyle brought me through a process that essentially he can build you out stories, webinars, all these different types of things. I'll have him give more info on it. But basically in this exercise, we're talking about, a webinar that I built out. But in that, there was a section where like you talk about the fruits of what has happened as a result of me breaking my dependency with cannabis and doing everything I do now. And it was such an amazing time to really be able, like, I think that was the first time, honestly, that I really thought about, like, holy shit, man, like I've got to go on some really cool podcasts, and like I've made amazing friends over the last 4 years, and I've got to like see a lot of places and do a lot of cool things. And, you know, even though life's challenging, I get to like, it's my challenge, right? I choose the challenge, you know, like I'm going through challenges for what actually means something to me personally. Whereas like I've been in situations where I'm going through challenges based on what a CEO or some owner of the company thinks that we should be doing, and I don't feel in alignment with it. So like it was that moment where I really realized like, wow, I'm very grateful to, you know, what I've been able to do, and, you know, for just believing in myself and things like that. And I'd love if, you know, you could share a little bit about like how, I mean, we've talked a little bit already about how like these stories make up our lives, but, you know, a little bit of like how you discovered this in you, right? Like how you discovered the ability to tell really good stories, and how your life is transformed as a result. Because, you know, if everything is a story, then your ability to change a story into what is empowering for you is, I think, the most valuable skill in in this whole entire life. So how did you first tap into that, and what did that look like for you? And where has your life been able to go as a result of being able to evaluate your stories and make sure that you're telling the story that's most accurate for your life and what you want it to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And well, I want to edify you. And this is a very common thing that happens. I remember this moment really well because you really resisted me without really knowing it in getting to that particular point, that talking about the particular moment of victory. And instead, and this is one of the most common things in the world that I work with people on and provide exactly this friction on. You wanted so badly to teach what you did and not how it felt to be on the other side of it. And this is something that experts of all different experiences and experience levels go through, because we're so used to honing our craft and talking about our craft and talking about the how we got the results, how we solved the problem, and we think it's what people want. But oftentimes we can go a lot further with a lot less by tapping into the emotional experience and communicating what it's like to be on the other side of that, not to impress anybody or to hype yourself up, but to show, hey, I know what it's like to be where you are right now and what it feels like to be on the other side. And how I got my start in this, I have been working in storytelling for a really long time, from writing content marketing for a startup and telling the story of how the startup was growing, but also through the process of working with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of experts just like you. And what I've learned and what I've practiced is very simple storytelling frameworks. I know the key ingredients for stories. And what I'm really proud of what I do is I provide a distant perspective, because a lot of the people that I work with, just like you, they can't see the trees for the forest. And I know that that's an inverted metaphor. And what I mean by that is we grow this deep forest of experience, and it takes a very long time, and it's a lot of hard work. And when we're so immersed in it, we have a hard time knowing what to share, and we feel the need to share all of it or as much as possible, when really just one tree might do, but we can't pick out that one tree because there's so much resonance and valence. And so what I love to do and how I work is by asking questions and letting you just speak and share. And I know what I'm listening for and draw out those key ingredients. And then a lot of the times, another quality about the people I work with, if you're familiar with the Kolbe score, which is a very kind of corporate thing, but a lot of the people I work with, they're very high quick starts, which means they take action fast and they bring a lot of early energy to things, not as much follow through energy. And I'm exactly the same way. And so if I gave you the perfect script for your story right away, a lot of the people that I work with, they would never read it. They would never go with it. And so instead, what I do is I know what these key ingredients of stories are. So once I draw them out of you and it takes a while and it's kind of a winding river, and I'm asking a lot of questions and I'm challenging you, and I'm asking, what did it smell like when you walked into that room? And people don't know where I'm trying to get with this. But then I can reflect back and I can tell you your story about what happened and why it happened, tapping into those key ingredients and infusing the core emotions and statements that really allow you to feel the story in a different way for the first time. And what you pointed at, which is something I'm really proud of, is there's a deeper medicine to this. That when you are truly able to express your stories in the way that you've always wanted to, but have never quite been able to, it doesn't just help you on your webinars. It doesn't just help you when you get on stage or get on podcasts, but you actually show up as a different person in a different way. And there's a real transformation that happens by clarifying your own story that's different than the coaching work that we're both well steeped in and well versed in. A lot of the components are actually the same, but yeah, there's something really magical to that, and it's what I'm really proud of. And it's the same thing that happens with teaching. And we want to cram as much information as possible into everything we do and everything we teach. And one of the reasons is we want to prove how smart we are. And another reason is because it feels so good to talk about all these things because we're so passionate and excited about these things. But a lot of the times what feels so good for us to teach isn't actually, and maybe it is the good stuff that got your clients results. But that doesn't mean that that's what your listener needs to really move to the right decision. And just like we did with that story, it took some friction and some challenge to be able to say, no, we don't need to talk about all these things. Let's just talk about this one thing. Because instead of teaching us how to do something, like if we were a weight loss coach, or like, I'm going to teach you how to get abs, and you need to do the keto diet. And to do the keto diet, you need to throw out all the gluten in your pantry because gluten is messing with your gut and it's creating these kind of things and blah, 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 blah. And if I'm somebody who doesn't have abs and is overweight, and I've probably heard 12 other people just like you talk about this before, I've probably worked with a few people, and now I have a well-developed system of beliefs of, well, this will never work for me because I just don't have the genetics. I don't have the willpower. Dieting isn't fun. Exercise isn't fun. No matter what it is, it's fine. But no matter what it is, I'm not going to listen to you talk about the benefits or the mechanics of the ketogenic diet. And no matter how much information you give me, it's not going to shift things for me. But if instead we focus on what are the belief systems that are keeping this person stuck in where they are, and how can we change those beliefs? Not necessarily how can we show them the exact steps to do that, because even if they do believe us, a lot of the times they're going to feel like, well, I can go and do this on my own. I'll just go fix myself now. Thanks, Ryan. But they'll do it for one day and they won't do it that well. And then they're going to add us to the list of people that talked a big game but didn't help them. And so it's actually a disservice to them. You're harming people by how much you're teaching. It's crazy.
Dude, that is so true, man. And like, it's not that it's bad. It's just that, is it effective? Again, it's not that it couldn't help someone, but like, if you have the opportunity to help a couple of people or a couple thousand people, how are you going to do that? And you know, the analogy that came to me, or what are you going to choose to do is what I should have said. But the analogy that came to me is like, it's like watching Netflix versus Gaia, right? Now, again, Gaia is amazing, right? Incredible info on the secrets to the universe, but it's all teaching. It's the last thing I want to turn on at the end of the night when I've already been like teaching and doing stuff all day. And for most people most clients, most people, for any of you guys listening, how many of you woke up in a ashram today in India or were in a hammock all day? Probably no one, right? So like a lot of us are going through all of these things each day that we must do to be a human being, right? Pay bills, work, etc. So when you go to a webinar, you want to be entertained, right? And if you go there and someone's like, this is why you shouldn't eat gluten, it's, even if you don't have celiac disease, it could still be damaging. You're going to be like, fucking snooze fest, right? But if you can talk to someone, if someone can talk to you rather, and share a story about their life, right? Well, now you're on board because you're hearing what's called a hero's journey. You're seeing how this could be you, right? Because this person knows how to connect that, like, hey, you might be seeing me up here, but I'm no different than you, and this is why. That kind of presentation pulls people in. And like you were saying, like, we do a disservice for any of us that are out there and supporting others in whatever service we choose to sell or create or whatever it is. We have a duty to be able to foster as many people as possible through what we know will help them. And at the end of the day, like what I found too, put it this way, your first class that I went through, no, second time I went through it, and we polished the first one and changed it around based on the programs I had created. That's the story I told on Aubrey Marcus. I told that on Paul Chek. I told that on Kyle Kingsbury. So like for any of you guys that are curious about like how this has actually shown up in my day-to-day life, it's literally the story I tell on almost every podcast, right? Like the really going back to the whole story around my father and like really diving into that. Like that was you that helped me put that together and really be able to share it in a way where I really am aware of like what the true lessons were in that story. And the first person that became aware of that was me, right? Because I knew the experience had changed me. I knew that my whole life had led to this point, but I didn't know what points to draw on that were most important for me. And I didn't know how to communicate them in a way that would make other people be able to see themselves within my story, right? So that it wasn't just my story. It was, hey, if I can do this, you can too, and that's a skill. It doesn't just come, at least it didn't for me, and getting on podcasts, doing webinars, etc. How amazing would it be to be able to share a story that you've repped, right? That is accurate, that is going to pull all the right things out. You know how many people I've got to connect with based on the stories you've helped me tell about myself? It's amazing, man. Like every client I've been able to support and them hearing that story first and getting connected to it and coming to the CCC or whatever I'm offering at the time. It's been amazing, man. So I completely agree with everything you're saying. It's so important. And a lot of people just don't know it. I didn't know it before I met you.
Yeah, we don't know that there's structures to things. And so we go off kind of the wrong feelings. A lot of times we just wing it because we know we're experienced people. We have a lot of great things to say and to teach. And it's not just the story that happens. And what I really appreciate that you're pointing to is that there's a skill set within here. And what that skill set is and does, it's not just speaking, but it's actually being able to listen. And we want to immerse ourselves in who our client is and what they really need. And when we're not doing this is when we're teaching a bunch and we're meandering in our stories because we're just self-referencing in a way. We're just doing what feels good to us. And it's a disservice to those that we're listening to. And when you can start to understand, okay, this is what makes up a great story. I need to understand where my client is right now and how they feel, and then find moments and actually use their language in the stories that I tell in service to them. This is what creates that connection and that shift and that understanding. And it allows us to be more present. It changes how we show up to ourselves and to our clients and to everyone else. And it is a skill set. These days, I am starting to see it like a martial art in a lot of ways. There are certain movements that at first, when you try and practice them, doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like wax on, wax off. You're like, oh man, I thought I was going to do backflips and stuff. And now I'm just waxing these cars. But all of a sudden, after practicing these for long enough, you realize that you've been learning how to block a punch, and you realize that you've been doing these kind of things. And that's what knowing what this simple universalizing statement and why we use it and where we use it and what the purpose is and how this impacts somebody's psychology. And when we can start to practice and move through these frameworks, something magical happens when you really are well-versed in your stories. And the beautiful thing is, and a lot of people are like, well, is it inauthentic if I'm just learning these techniques to tell a story instead of doing it? It's more authentic. It's inauthentic if you are just referencing your own mind and trying to impress somebody. but it is more authentic when you can know what this story is and be well practiced in it and show up. So you're not trying to read from your script anymore, but you're present. You're there with them in the moment. And instead of like trying to remember what line comes next, you're able to be playful and open and respond to the questions and see how the audience is doing. And you can lean back on your training so that you can be there with the people. And that's the long-term magic that comes from truly mastering these simple techniques.
Yeah, 100%, man. And like, I was actually joking, thinking in my head and joking, like, I'm literally going to be telling that story, I almost guarantee, right after this podcast, because I'm doing a podcast right after this. And it's so true, because in doing this, God, hundreds of times now, I just know what I'm going to say every time. And I know like 18 different things I could say based on maybe a specific niche I'm talking to, a certain type of individual I'm speaking with. To be fair, ladies and gents listening, like within each story, there are almost infinite other stories within each story in our life. So there isn't like only one version of a story, right? Like there's a version if you're talking to, like, for instance, if I'm talking to people that are young kids, I'm going to talk a lot more about my dependency and what it did for me, like what it did for my mindset, things like that, right? I'm going to focus much more on dependency. If I'm talking to adults, I may still talk about dependency, but the way in which I tell my story based around it is going to have more emphasis on like the finding my purpose and meaning in life, because as you get older, like you start, being more focused on those things. You start being focused on running towards pleasure rather than trying to get away from pain. When I was 20, I just didn't want to be broke, right? I just didn't want to be not muscular. I knew what I didn't want. So that's where I was focused on, was getting out of what I didn't want. But I wasn't yet focused on running towards what I do want. And so like there's going to be different ways I tell the story based on whom I'm around, not for any other reason than if I try to tell the 20-year-olds the version I tell the 40-year-olds, they're not going to get it. It's going to be completely like, it's going to be like, oh, cool story, man. But I don't really see how I could see myself in that story, because you're talking about having a house or kids or any of these things, and I'm 20 years old, right? So, the way in which you relate to the people you're speaking with allows you to be really the alchemist that you must be if you want to be able to get a message out there that is able to shift the minds and hearts of people, that allow them to light up the world more, that allow the world to be a more beautiful place, So, yeah, I 100% agree, man. And, I'm curious for you, like, having worked with so many people in this, like, what are some of the most wild things you've seen, or maybe what are some of the most common things you see? We'll start there. What are some of the most common things you see in individuals that come to work with you on their stories, right, on presentations, etc., after they've worked with you? Like, I'm just curious, because I have my own things that happen, but I'm curious to see if you notice any like correlations or things that happen more often than not.
Yeah. One of the things that I really enjoy about the work that I do, and one of the different perspectives I take, is that a lot of common coaching maxims say that your ideal client is you 5 years before you are right now. And while I do think that's a great frame of reference for me, I like to work with people who are 5 years ahead of me. And so I've heard hundreds of stories of turning points of how people have abandoned themselves, neglected their families, and to pursue a success that is not really what they wanted, but what they felt they were supposed to do. And they come to me usually at the point where this crossed wire that they have trying to pursue this success is no longer productive. Early on, it's productive. The crossed wire energy of I'm going to prove them wrong, I'm going to work harder, I'm going to do these things is really useful in the early stages. It is toxic, but it's really useful. And right when they come to me, it gets to the point where this energy can no longer keep them or get them higher. They hit this ceiling, this threshold. And usually what that looks like is they're managing the success that they've created now takes all of their energy, and they're no longer able to access those visionary states or activities that truly got them to where they're going. And so they want to work with me for the first thing so that I can help them quickly get those stories that are actually going to get them results and solve that basic problem of, well, if I can bring in more clients, I can get more sales, and these problems will be solved. But the magical thing happens when they start relating to their stories differently. And a lot of times they stop pursuing the achievement-based success and start tapping into something more like artistry or legacy. They have a new level of clarity on their why and their purpose and what they're doing. And as such, they're able to connect with that purpose, and they show up in an entirely different way, even if they don't actually change their speeches. And so what this means is a lot of the times where, I remember one client I worked with, he came onto a call with me and we were writing a talk for a retreat for CEOs and founders that he wanted to host. And he was like, well, I feel really guilty. I feel like a fraud because I'm not enjoying the spaciousness that I'm wanting to promise or cultivate in this thing at all. And we worked through that and started to build stories around it because it was really useful, juicy material. And a few months later, after we had concluded working together, he ends up selling a few of his businesses, reaching out to this woman and knowing that he had connected with her before, but knowing that she was the love of his life, and creates the space in order to do that. And now they have a baby and they're living in Portugal. And he made this huge pivot in his life and created the space to be the person he really wanted to be, but never gave himself permission to in the first place. And so that's the real magic and the real shifts that happen. And so there is a common pattern of moving from achievement-based success to legacy and impact-based success. And then what they do because of that is often surprising for me every time, but really, really incredible. And it's difficult for me to know exactly how to communicate that or articulate that or promise something like that in the work I do, because people come to me and I want to say, well, you're going to make more money. The first time you give this speech on a high stakes stage, you're going to make back what you invest with me, which is often what happens. But the real magic is you're going to astound yourself with what happens because of this upgraded story that we're not going to be able to tell what it is until much later.
Yeah, man. 100% agreed. And, it reminds me of that Carl Jung quote, until you bring the unconscious into the conscious, it will dictate your life and you will call it fate. It's like that whole idea of like, really, what are we doing here? We're not simply talking about creating presentations. We're talking about what are the narratives that control your entire experience of life. When was the last time you decided to look into these narratives and see what stories you were telling yourself, about those you love, about life, etc.? Because if we have, let's say, 70,000 thoughts per day, 75 of which are negative, I don't know how these researchers came up with that stat, but apparently it's a stat. Do you really want to leave your narratives up to chance? Chances are, like I can tell you guys from my personal experience, and I'm sure Kyle will agree too, I've been actively working on my stories for 4 years now, and I am still finding disempowering ones almost every day. The difference is that now I have the skill set to be able to work with them. And then from there, to be able to take stories and actually create empowering ones that can get you in front of individuals that you can change the entire course of their lives. Well, that's just a great bonus, being able to do this first for yourself. And like you said, astound yourself, man. It's so important. And I feel like, that's why I love having these conversations, because I wish someone told me this when I was getting into entrepreneurship. I wish someone told me this when I was going through my original awakening point in 2019. I'm just extremely grateful that I met you and was able to get into this. And based on that too, like, where we first met was a retreat. And because this podcast is called This One Time on Psychedelics, I did want to give you an opportunity to share an experience you had recently, an MDMA experience that you had at the retreat. I'd love if you could share like whatever you feel okay and open to sharing before we wrap up here, because I love story time. Speaking of stories.
Yeah. And that retreat that you're referencing was one of the big turning points in my life. And I would suggest going back to our first episode, because I'm certain we talked in depth about it there on this show. And I recently had the opportunity to attend this retreat, which was a facilitated MDMA experience which is outside of the norm of what I've usually seen in the world. I've seen ayahuasca, lots of psilocybin retreats, but MDMA is not exactly what I've seen used or emphasized in this process. And it was really incredible. It was 3 days, kind of a little bit, and 3.5 or so. And the first day, we dove right into it pretty quickly. We were around for an hour or two, talked about setting intentions, got to know each other a little bit, and then we're off on our first journey. And it was a great experience of opening up to each other and sharing things, but I could tell a lot of people were still resisting the medicine in a lot of ways. And the people who were facilitating this, and it was like Mike Zeller is the guy behind this, and I'm certain he's going to be on the show.
Yeah, he came out a couple weeks ago. Yep.
Yeah. But he had like this almost like a wine cabinet of all these varieties of MDMA that would emphasize the body or the spiritual connection or this or that. And it was really, really incredible, the precision that was made in this. And I think one of the most important things is having a container that really guides and holds a good space. A lot of the times when I've been sitting in some kind of medicine ceremony, I find myself drifting and kind of worrying or being concerned with other people. I think that's, it's maybe one of my things, but it's also a sign that maybe the container isn't as clear and as good as it could be. And I think they did a really good job at setting the right space. So the first night we had our first ceremony, and then we had a full day of integrating, of reflecting, of communicating with each other and connecting deeper. And then the third night, we had our second ceremony. And there were some incredible people there. More than my own personal experience, the one that I like to share the most about is there was a woman there, a very Christian, straight-laced woman in her 60s, a grandma. And when she signed up for this retreat, she thought that she was going to have some like salads and herbs and that was plant medicine. And she had never done anything like this in her whole life. And like a couple of weeks before it really went down, she was like, well, I already paid for this, and it seems like God wants me to do this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done this. And the first night, she was like kind of cooped up in a fetal position, feeling really nervous, not very open. And then the second ceremony, she was so alive and happy and like overflowing with love in so many ways. It was so incredible and inspiring to see the shift that had happened. And she felt more aligned with God, more connected with her purpose, not less because of it. And I doubt that this is the message, that probably a lot of listeners of this podcast aren't quite on that level. But I think that it's really important for those that are really devoted and really faithful and perhaps have paradigms that could be changed with this. And it's amazing to see the spiritual properties of this. And I feel through practices and ceremonies like this, especially since the 2019, that I've been able to recalibrate and reconnect with my own spirituality and connection with God. That is different than the Christian paradigm that I was brought up in, but it is profound and it is sacred, and it now leads my life in directions. And yeah, I've certainly been living in faith and being tested, and it comes down to not just having these big experiences, but living in that faith, which is like what you said, just showing up for your meditations and taking care of yourself and living in authentic and aligned ways. I came home with some incredible feelings. And I also, right after I was going through this, I've been going through like a long dietary and parasite cleanse in the months leading up to this. And I was still feeling a lot of it, and ended up choosing to do a really high dose of these anti-parasite things. And that really impacts your gut health. And if you know anything about parasites, you probably have them. We don't have time to talk about it, but if you have a pulse, it's probably something you're experiencing right now. And when you're starting to kill off these things, they make you feel bad so that you'll eat sugar and feed them. and they're really good at this. And very rarely have I ever like woken up with that kind of anxiety, that biological anxiety, and thought to myself, oh, well, this is the parasite die-off, or this is gut dysbiosis. We come up with our own story. And so it was really difficult, and I'll admit discouraging, to return home and be experiencing this like extreme biological anxiety and trauma. And it was hard for me to keep that faith and those feelings that I had just come away with. And I don't necessarily have any kind of concrete point or answer, but it was an observation. I was really hard on myself because I was like, dang, I just got home from this retreat. I felt all these good things. I guess it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Why aren't all my problems solved now? Dang it. And goes to say, I highly recommend it. I highly recommend, like, Mike Zeller has an incredible story. His episode's probably going to come out before mine if that's the case. And you should certainly listen to that because he is a true champion in this world. But there's so much more. Like, the ceremony is so much more before and so much more after. And it's what you can really bring back from that and hold on to and practice and integrate with those things that allows us to grow and move forward. And this is certainly a message as much for myself right now as it is for anyone listening.
Oh, 100%, man. You know, like, I find the exact same thing, you know, like, especially with MDMA and like heart opening medicines like that, because they do put you into such a love state that when you not come out of it, but when you expand into more than just love, like the possibility for all the challenges of life to hit you, it can be challenging to find your position again in that love, you know? And like we were talking about earlier, like, that's why, like, the last thing I want to do in those moments is what I actually know is required of me, which is like, do nothing, do less, sit down, be quiet, right? Like, you know, all the things to allow me to find that, because there are also those stories that still exist within me that want to sit in the shit, right? That want to victimize, that want to do those things, that want to say, why me, right? Why could I have an experience like that and now this one, right? And like, so I must be able to not fight with those voices, but be able to love those too, and be able to see the, like, those are just kids within me that are bummed because they had Chuck E. Cheese an hour ago and now they're sitting at the grandma's house bored, right? But how do I allow them to realize that, like, hey, grandma's house can be cool too, you know? Like, just change your story on it, you know? Like, you're comparing it to Chuck E. Cheese instead of comparing it to something that is relevant to actually grandma's house, you know? So totally heard, my man. And I find that, you know, especially at ceremonies too, like you mentioned the older woman that came, like, that's one of the most beautiful things for me to see is people experiencing things for the first time that bring them so much closer to their faith, to what matters in life. Like, that's the amazing thing about specifically MDMA, and other medicines definitely do it too. It's just the path to get there is a little bit shakier usually, but with MDMA, like, you know, just seeing people be like, wow, this is all I ever need. I just need you guys, and I just need like some water and maybe some food every once in a while, and I'm good. Like, to see people realize, like, wow, like, drop all their programming, even if it's just for a couple of hours, and have that experience. You know, I'll never say that everyone should have it, because I get certain people have, you know, certain conditions, things like that. But I will say that I believe that most people would benefit from having that experience at least once in their lives. You know, I would argue to say most people. I won't say all people, but I will say most people.
Woof. What a journey.
I know, dude. This has been
know
amazing.
You're hopping onto another show soon. I've got another call, and I'm so grateful for this space to create with you and,
Absolutely,
and share these stories and continue to grow together in journeys and in between journeys. You are one of my very best friends. And I'm so grateful for the medicines that led us to connect with each other in a lot of ways. And I think it's a testament to the power of this work.
Hell yeah, dude. 100% agreed. And Kyle, like, I'm just so grateful for you, bro. I always have such a blast diving in with you. And for anyone that is looking to connect with you, looking to supercharge their stories, looking to bring their mission to more audience in the world and have it touch more hearts, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? Of course, I'll put it in the show notes, but tell the people where they can find you, man.
Yeah, one of the best places if you're interested to see what my process is and just with a little sample, you can go to the Story Engine podcast, where every week I publish episodes of me co-creating stories with people just like Ryan, experts in their field of all kinds of stripes and experiences. So that's at thestoryengine.co/podcast. And I also invite you to connect with me on Instagram at Hey Kyle Gray, like Hey Kyle Gray, and that's Gray. And I also invite you to leave a review for this show, because it's a true labor of love. And leaving a review for podcasts is one of the best ways that you can support the growth of a show like this.
Dude, Kyle, you are the man. Guys, I love you all so much. I know you enjoyed the show. Every time I get to chat with Kyle, it's amazing how much he charges my battery. And, him and I chatted before this, and we were like, let's go in. Let's talk about some real stuff going on, because I know for us, and I also know for many people I work with, it seems like the last 6 to 8 months have been a little bit challenging, kind of like a new PR. So hopefully you guys found a lot of value in this. Make sure to reach out to Kyle. I think I was blatantly obvious in the show when I said that he has changed my life, and I 100% stand behind that. So make sure you go to the show notes, find out where you can find him. And until next time, guys, I hope you're all having the best day ever, to infinity and beyond. Peace.